All right, folks. So we are talking about the Dave Smith versus Douglas Murray, and in the last segment we talked about Darryl Cooper. There's just a lot of Dave, Douglas, and Darryl. It's difficult to keep them straight in my head, but here we get into some of the more substantive part of the debate, the Israel Palestine portion. So let's take a look here at Douglas Murray's just absurd perversion of history, followed by an even more absurd line of argument against Dave Smith, who has never been to the region. Yeah.
Full blockade around the country.
Wonderful fava beans.
Wonderful fava beans there. Yeah.
I think they put the full blockade around the country for the reason that they've always kind of done it there, that, yeah, they don't want too much stuff getting in. They want to keep them, as they put it, on a diet, and they don't want rockets to fly into Israel.
The second one is a kind of important one, isn't it? The final
Yeah,
one you said.
it is.
Okay, well, so is the first one, actually. So is the first one. Yes, like not flying rockets into Israel. Okay, that's important. But also the first part about living under blockade, that's kind of an important part of it, too. Notice he brushed right past that.
If the Palestinian leadership in Gaza after 2005 had not, from the get-go, decided to use Gaza as a stockpiling place for rockets to fire into Israel, all of it would be different. If they had just resisted the temptation that so many of us do in our lives to stop keeping RPGs in our cellars and then Katyusha rockets in our children's bedrooms, all of it could have been different. If that desire to live in peace beside your neighbors had superseded the desire to stockpile rockets, it would all be different.
Yeah, or if
And
Israel
what
just
you
hadn't
describe
occupied
as-
them for 60 years, it would all be different too.
They
I mean,
weren't
why is it the onus
occupying-
always
they
on
weren't
them?
Well, you believe in self-determination, I'm sure. Yes.
I believe in individual rights. Yeah, sure.
Okay, individual rights. And that includes the right to make bad decisions. Yes. The Palestinians in Gaza, when they voted in Hamas, made a very bad decision.
Yeah.
Okay, wait, whoa, time out. He just did a very sleazy debate trick. You know, Murray is a skilled debater. We covered the debate where the Monk debate, where he and Matt Taibbi were teammates criticizing the mainstream media. Watch what he says here.
You believe in self-determination, I'm sure. Yes.
I believe in individual rights. Yeah, sure.
Okay, individual rights. And that includes the right to make bad decisions. Yes. The Palestinians in Gaza, when they voted in Hamas, made a very bad decision.
Yeah.
Okay, so what he's doing there is he's jumping from, he asked Dave, you believe in the right to self-determination? Yes. Dave says, yeah, sure. Okay, I believe in individual rights. Then he says, you believe in the right to make bad decisions? Well, the Palestinians made bad decisions. He's acting as if Dave Smith agreed to the notion, the supposition that Palestinians have self-determination. No, we believe they have the right to self-determination. They have not been granted self-determination. I would not grant you that. So you can't just go right from that supposition to say, well, okay, you believe in the right to self-determination, therefore every quote-unquote bad decision that the Palestinians have made is squarely on them. That suggests that they have an autonomy that they do not have. And it is my opinion, and I would assume, I can't speak for Dave, I would assume that it's his opinion, that a population that is denied autonomy cannot be granted the same moral and political agency as an occupying power like Israel. The more autonomy you have, the more agency you have. That's my opinion. I would assume that's Dave's opinion. I'm not sure. But Douglas Murray wants to skate right past that because he wants to deny the history of occupation. He just said they weren't occupied since 1967. Now, as for their bad decision and their bad decisions that led to the blockade, here's an article in Plus 972 magazine, which came out in 2011, a year after the paper was founded. Plus 972 magazine is a left-wing Israeli publication founded by Yuval Abraham, who was one of the co-directors of No Other Land. The blockade on Gaza began long before Hamas came to power. The gradual closure of Gaza began in 1991, part of the First Intifada, when Israel canceled the general exit permits that allowed most Palestinians to move freely through Israel and occupied Palestinian territories. Since then, the closure, which may soon be challenged by the Second Freedom Flotilla, has become almost hermetic. And if you look here, The gradual closure of Gaza began in 1991 when Israel canceled the general exit permit that allowed Palestinians to move freely through the Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. Non-Jewish residents of Gaza and the West Bank were required to obtain individual permits. This was during the First Intifada, which began in the late 80s. While the mere mention of the word intifada invokes the image of suicide bombers in the Western imagination, it's important to bear in mind that the First Intifada was, by and large, a non-violent uprising comprised of civil disobedience, strikes, and boycotts of Israeli goods. In other words, the First Intifada was peaceful. Those were good decisions, I assume, in Douglas Murray's eyes. Those were the good decisions that the Palestinians made. And what came with those good decisions? A blockade. A blockade. And then the blockade became more draconian after the election of Hamas, which was funded in large part by Israel, in an election that Hamas won by only 3 points against the more moderate Fatah party, which means is pretty safe to assume, I think, that absent Israel's thumb on the scale, the moderates would have won that election and there'd be no Hamas in power. Douglas Murray wants you to know none of that. That's why I say, to harken back to the last segment, he is as mean-spirited and malicious a liar on this as Darryl Cooper is on Nazi Germany and World War II. He is not the moral superior to Darryl Cooper at all.
Not at all.
Not
at all. And okay, so people have self-determination, right? They make their choices, and you make your choices and you take the consequences, he's saying. All right, so when a bunch of Eastern Europeans decided to go massacre an indigenous people, force them out of their houses, force them off their land, refuse to recognize the UN's determination that these people had the right to return, and to refuse to recognize that for 76 years, do they have agency?
Right.
Of course,
and
Douglas.
In the years,
but
hang on.
Yes.
Hang on. And in the years after that, they made bad decision after bad decision. It was a very bad decision to continually fire thousands of rockets into Israel. It was a very bad decision to use what boats came in early on and to use the smuggling networks from Egypt, not to bring in supplies that you could actually build a thriving society with, but to bring in rockets. It was a very bad idea. No, there was not starvation in Gaza after 2005. No, there was no deficit of goods coming in. I've been plenty of times.
There was no deficit?
No, there are
no
plenty
goods were kept out.
There are plenty. How many? Have you been to the crossing points?
No.
When were you last there at all?
I've never been.
You've never been?
Well, am I not allowed to talk about it now? I've never been to. Have you ever been to Nazi Germany? Are you allowed to have feelings about them?
You can't time travel, but you
Well,
can.
right.
But you can travel.
Okay, but so what? So what's the point? Like,
No,
okay.
I find that
lots
very...
of people have been there and agree with me, and lots of people have been there and agree with you.
Yeah, but
so I
if
don't
you're
know
going to
what
spend a year and a half talking about a place, you should at least do the courtesy of visiting it.
all right. I just think this is a non-argument.
You don't
but
think?
Okay. No, I think it's a non-argument.
But if you're an
Well, you have to go and touch the ground. To
No,
be
I
able to
think
talk
you have
about
to
it?
see. I think it's a good idea to see stuff, particularly if you
Okay.
spend a career talking about something. Yes, I have a.
What if you know enough about Israel to know it's a horrible place that I'd never want to set foot in, because I'd never want to patronize the businesses there. I would never want to lend it support in any way, including whatever dollars I might spend going there.
Yeah, and has Douglas Murray been to every single place he's ever written about or spoken about? I really doubt that. Also, it demonstrates his inherent classist perspective.
Right.
Because who can afford to do that?
Exactly.
Who can afford to do that? So basically, unless you have the money and leisure time to take rather exotic and expensive trips to the Middle East, you can't talk about it. Well, that would limit that conversation to the middle class and up.
Right, of course. I mean, so on point after point after point. I mean, then this is what I mean. Like, he just resorts to the sleaziest, lowest tactics, and this isn't even a good tactic. I mean, what Dave Smith there says is that's not an argument. I mean, of course, that's
and
not an argument.
even if you did go to the checkpoints, unless you have some kind of special inside access to people that you can interview and talk to, what does that do? Go to a checkpoint. I mean, what do you know? What do you know? Like, a truck went in. Looks okay to me.
Yeah, no, it's an embarrassing kind of a point to make, combined with, like I said, just a completely ahistorical framing of the conflict. I mean, Israel is a British project as much as it is anything else, in terms of the history
Well,
that
it started as a British
yeah,
project.
that far predates World War II. Exactly. And so, I mean, this is why, look, I ultimately don't really find debates like this to be all that fruitful, because it's just so obvious what this place is. This is just a settler colonial state that achieved its expansion through violence and through bloodshed and through repeat tactics. I mean, the whole this whole telling of history where he insists that the Palestinians just have never wanted peace. Well, yeah, a lot of Palestinians didn't take kindly to having their land
Of
stolen
course.
from them. And when they would protest that, they would be punished by having even more land stolen from them. And then when there would be violent uprisings, Israel would react much in the same way they're reacting now, not on the same scale because they don't have the same modern weaponry, but through collective punishment, massacres. And so the conflict would deepen and both sides would dig in more. It's the same playbook that has been happening over and over and over again. There's nothing complicated about it. It's very obvious. And for a British guy especially to be up there with this accent, talking about how no, there was no occupation. I mean, it's laughable. It's laughable. Like I
Yeah,
didn't find the debate to be very much worth watching overall. There's just a few things that stick out, but other than that, it was just kind of what you would expect. And I thought, look, I thought Dave did a reasonably good job. I certainly couldn't have done any better. I mean, Murray is a skilled debater. He's very intimidating. He looks at you
uses
with that Hannibal
tricks.
Lecter
Yeah.
stare, right? So I thought he held up fine. I mean, he did well enough. I couldn't have done any better. That's for sure.
I don't see Dave. I don't even think he would do this given what he said about Hamas. I don't even know if he thinks this. I don't know why no one goes at with a guy like Douglas Murray. And of course, from what we saw in this debate, anytime he was on the back heel, he evaded. He went for straw men, and I'm sure you have some of that. But if you just went at him, do you know the DNA tests have to be court ordered in Israel? You can't just order a DNA test. Why do you think that is? You're premising all this on the assumption that these people are indigenous and that gives them some kind of right, which in and of itself is a dubious proposition because many, many people claimed that land across the millennium. Do the Persians have a claim? The Persians held that land for a very long time through their various incarnations and empires. The Egyptians held it, the Romans held it, the Greeks held it. So are they all indigenous? I mean, the Semites didn't start there. They didn't spring up out of the ground. They came from another region and moved in just like everybody else who ever lived there. At that point, the only thing you can argue is, and this really exposes you, I've had many secular Jews at that point say, we prayed toward that land for, so it's religion. It's religion. You're saying you have a theocratic religious right to that land, even though you can't even get a genetic test in Israel because you're not actually descended from the people who founded that religion. The people, from what studies we have, the people who are actually descended from those people are the Palestinians, as you would expect.
Well, yes, and that whole religious claim is actually at odds, ironically, with the founding Zionists, who are mostly European non-Jews, many of whom were pretty rabid anti-Semites themselves. They were the first people to really construct this understanding of Judaism as a race and not as a religion. That's where it has its roots. That's why a lot of religious Jews are not Zionists. That's why a lot of the secular Jews are not Zionists, because it is secular. But, of course, you jumble that now in the modern context because now they have to claim that opposition.
Amalek.
Right. Well, now they have to claim that opposition to Zionism is anti-Semitism. So now they have to make these
Right.
biblical claims, which were not at all the claims of the early Zionists. In fact, it was the exact opposite. They were the first ones to ever say, hey, you know what? What if we say that the Old Testament is what if we say that according to the Old Testament, this is the homelands of the Jews as a race of people, not as a religious sect, but as a race of people with a bloodline back to this land. That's why I say it's a very racist strain of
course.
Judaism
Of
that was
course.
actually really concocted by mostly non-Jews.
Right. Well, who wanted them out of Europe?
Right, exactly.
Please clap.